I'm Irvine Johnson, here from Esk'et. I'm one of the hereditary chiefs here. From the Kalals Johnson side. My Indian name is Cwliken, C-W-L-I-K-E-N. It came from my great-grandfather, my grandmother's father, who gave me his name when I was born. I was born right here, right next door here, to this building here, and a log house across from the church. Life was idyllic then, when I was here. As a young boy, we had a lot of elders, and all of the elders could teach us and talk to us, correct us. And it was a real good place to grow up. And I never had very much interaction with the non-native people at all, because most of the time we were right here, right on the reserve or up in the meadows. And it was a wonderful time because I had my grandfather and grandmother to myself all of the time, and both were excellent teachers. I think that only one time do I remember ever going to town, into the town of Williams Lake, when I was perhaps 4 or 5 years old, and just staring wide-eyed at civilization, I guess, if you want to call it that there. But I thought we were pretty civilized out here, but it was progress. It was amazing to this young boy to see all of this here, all of the cars that were at the time, because there wasn't too many cars here on the reserve. I think there was 2 vehicles. My dad had one, and Uncle Charlie had one. The first traumatic experience was being hauled away in the back of a cattle truck. And I remember that vividly, because I had a younger brother that he wanted to come along, and they had to convince him that he was too young to come along. He couldn't come along. And I thought I was so grown up because I was able to do this thing here, but I didn't know what I was getting into. A cold trip to the mission. Taking a real shortcut here at this point here, because I don't want to explain every little thing there, but I can think now, and I really believe that they started the brainwashing real early, because we could not rebel from how they treated us. And right away, it didn't take long to realize, that these people here were far different than what we grew up with. The loving nurturing that we got from my grandparents here was far different than the harsh and cruel ways that they made us get in line and not deviate from that line. Things there in the early 50s were really cruel. I often wondered, did they fail the cruelty test, or did they pass the cruelty test in order to get hired there? Because every one of them were cruel, and they made it a very ugly place to grow up. But I don't know if a lot of people know what happens in a herd of horses, you know, and it's in a herd of people, it's not that much different, but there's a hierarchy of how things go. And if the king of the hill beat somebody up, well, the beaten up went and found somebody they could beaten up, and it went down the line like that there. So I was quite a favorite for a lot of people to pick on there when I was a little kid over there. I'm a little fairer than everybody, I understand that. And I think it came from my parentage, but not one moment of my life have I ever been anything other than Native. I grew up Native here. I've always been Native. But the cruelty that they did there often caused people to want to run away from that. They made things so bad for people that they wanted to run away, and when they ran away, once they were caught and brought back, they were further humiliated in any devious way they could think, you know, whether they're shaving their hair, patches of their hair left, you know, just, you know, I mean, just so awful. But the most striking thing to me was 3 people ran away. I can't remember their names now, but they were in a dormitory with maybe 60 other boys. And they took them out in the middle of the hallway there, and they had them take off the clothes, and he knelt down holding a chair in front of him, and they strapped him and strapped him and strapped him and strapped him till they lost all body control, you know. They peed themselves, they crapped themselves, but they just kept on going. We were all crying around there. Empathy for the kid there. You know, but it was almost wanting to see if they could top themselves all of the time, because there was 3 of them, and I remember this one brother, he was well over 6 feet, and he was strong. And he strapped the longest, the furthest, and I hated this man here for the longest time. I could never forgive him. Later on, I guess I don't know if I ever forgave him, but I definitely never forgot that. Because they were the ones that were making it so bad there that those kids ran away, and then they made it even worse. That was so traumatic to me that I never wanted to run away. I never wanted to receive that treatment, because they seemed like they would discuss amongst themselves and see how they could make it worse. I didn't like that. I never liked that, and I never ever forgave, the whole idea that they could make things really bad for somebody, and then when they tried to get away from it, they were just purely awful. So when we talk about things like this here, like reconciliation, how do we reconcile things like that? I don't know. I don't know how you could get people's forgiveness, because even today in today's society, I hear, earlier this week here, the Minister of Indian Affairs for 6 years says he never heard of any of the abuse. And all of that stuff used to go up the line and all of that there, so they don't. I guess for him it was acceptable behavior of all of the things that they were doing. Because we hear of all of the other people. I mean, what is it, 7,000 kids dead at residential schools all over the place. I know they wouldn't find any at St. Joseph's Mission because they had an incinerator. What kind of people would do that? So reconciliation, I mean, how do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, like the Jews for what happened, by the Germans in Germany during the Second World War. How do you reconcile that? I mean, there isn't any. The Pope says he's going to travel to Canada. But I don't think I'm going to get any satisfaction. I know I'm not going to go try to get an audience or anything like that there. Maybe then it becomes my fault that I'm not trying to reconcile, because I don't know that some of these people here were alive to ever say that they were sorry. I talked to one supervisor after I grew up and I was a chief in this community. I talked to him, and right away he went on aggressive defensive and said, "You are not a perfect child." No, I wasn't perfect, but I was a child. He was the adult in this thing here, and he was one of the perps doing a lot of this stuff, and I didn't feel that he ever apologized. So how do you reconcile that? So a whole lot of empty promises or empty apologies from a lot of people. I don't know that I'm going to get a lot of reconciliation in my heart for that there. So, stronger, brainier people will come up with some way or whatever, but at this point here, I don't really know. But I look at the way things are today, a lot of our young kids, yes, they're not in residential school, but they're suffering the effects of the residential school and the upbringing, the intergenerational trauma that happened to them. But we know there's no residential schools anymore. Nobody's in a residential school on this reserve here. So, you know, don't complain about losing your culture because the band is trying to bring back the languages, and a lot of people are not even trying to learn that. When I started this thing here, I said we had an idyllic learning environment here when we were kids, and all of these grandparents were around. We had a lot of elders that knew the history, you know, well prior to the early 1900s. We had a lot of time. We heard a lot of stories. There was no TVs here. It was just the radio that was used for message time and the news. So our storytelling was sitting around the blocks around a fire with people telling stories. And I remember some of them, quite a lot of them were hilarious type, you know. I mean, they told fun stories. There was a lot, you know, and with the language you can describe things much clearer than you can in English, you know, because we have words that describe whether the person's, in English we say, well, a person's lying down, and we have words that describe whether the person's laying on their back, laying on their stomach, laying on their side, and it's just more descriptive. So when they were telling these stories here, a lot of it was in Esk'etemc, and it was so funny. Just the laughter around there was really good, and there were so many good storytellers. Now we have nobody telling any stories anywhere. Everybody drives around with their windows rolled up, and they drive, and a wave maybe sometimes, but nobody stops and talks anymore. Nobody visits each other anymore. Well, again, I guess COVID-19, but even when COVID-19 wasn't here, there was a lot of people that would just go by somebody, you know. I mean, it's almost like the enemies are within, you know, that kind of mentality. You know, you don't talk to anybody unless you're really close to them or whatever, you know. And I think long ago, everybody talked to each other. You know, no matter how bad things were, how poor things were, everybody talked to each other. Now we occasionally we have people stop and talk to each other, you know, and I think this is how we learned stories before, or how we learned our history. This is how the elders taught us all those things that happened a long time ago, you know. And I remember travels we had with Dad. We went anywhere, we went with the wagon, and it took hours. And he told stories the whole time that we were there, you know. I tried to, you know, have him tell a different story or whatever, you know, but what he was trying to do is teach me to tell a story the way he told it. Not to take all kinds of shortcuts and all that. And that's what we do nowadays. We take shortcuts. Shortcuts sometimes end up being the long way to do things, but it's definitely the wrong way to do it when you think that we're leaving out a whole lot of time for teaching, learning, and understanding the experiences that the old timers had a long time ago. There were so many stories when we were going to the river, you know, that he told. There's one that he told about the Crees coming over and capturing two people from this one little village, how the people went after them. And every time he started to tell that same story, I'd say, "You told that story before." So he'd say, "Well, I want to hear that story. You tell it." Oh, and I tried to take all kinds of shortcuts and you know, just sort of encapsulate the story and, you know, succinctly. And he said, "That's not the way I told you the story. I want you to tell the story the way I tell it." And it never really dawned on me until quite a while later. I was doing research for some places on the river, and I read stories in Tate that he captured when he was here. When Tate came here to record stories and whatnot. And that story was in there that Dad used to tell. And it just stood the hairs on my neck up because that's the way Dad told the story. So somebody in Dad's family told that story. Told the story to Dad. Dad was telling me that story in that way. And that's the way Tate wrote the story. And it just, like I say, it just sent shivers up and down my back because that's why Dad wanted me to tell the story the same way that he told it. He was trying to make a storyteller out of me, I guess, and I was too stupid to learn, you know. I was too busy trying to grow up. I was trying to look at everything but what he was telling me, and I really regret some of those things that I've just sort of didn't really see until much later. Again, some of that stuff, how do you get back to the point of reconciling some of those things there? And I think the only way that we could do it is try to bring back some of the stuff that they used to do a long time ago. They grew up far better than we did, but my grandfather, as old as he was in a residential school too. He suffered some of that trauma. So we never ever talked to anybody that was prior to that, you know. I mean, that's way back in history, but to understand that the young kids went out on a quest to learn, you know, what's going to be in their future, what their guideposts are going to be, and things like that. That's all gone. We could bring that back. I mean, all it takes is a will. But we don't do that anymore. You know, I mean, we're changing. We're changing. We're melting towards society nowadays rather than looking at some of the good things that we had, because we all know that there was, you know, I mean, if we had a room of elders here and we could brainstorm about some things and how we could do that, you know, I think that we could probably have a real good plan, then all it takes is the desire to do it, and I don't know how you instill that. So again, that's reconciling, isn't it? So how do you bring that back? You know, I mean, I guess I have difficulty with that word. I'm trying to assume that when we do that there, we're going to correct, we're going to improve. And I'm not sure that what we're doing is the right way. Where I'm at today is when we talk about reconciliation and truth and where we are in society in 2020-21. We can all see where we're at and what the deficiencies are and whatnot. What we need to do as a group, as Esk'etemc, as Esk'etemc, as Kalmuch, where it is that we're going in society, and try to figure out a better plan so that all of the people in our community can benefit as a whole with everybody else. I'm looking at places where we can all get together and hash out a plan that all Esk'etemc can work towards, where we can actually, you know, because it's not in one direction only, you know, I mean, it's culturally, it's definitely spiritually, physically. I mean, we need to know a lot of things about ourselves that will help us all go in the right direction. And I mean, this is a group. A lot of years ago, we used to have huge meetings. And I remember some people, you know, standing up and trying to get us to move towards one direction, you know, and then the discussion becomes, you know, is that the right direction and all of that there, but at least we had all of those discussions when we did not persevere in order to achieve that, you know. So I think the Esk'etemc society as a whole still has to do things all together, even families that don't seem to want to get along, you know, I still think they have to want to get better to themselves, you know. And I believe that we can get back to that. We can go back to that. and at least try to get this glass might be half full, but we're filling it more. You know, this is where we're starting, but we're going to fill this glass so that it is a full glass. Everybody's glass then runs over. But we need to do it together. We need to get together. We need to put down a lot of the little battles here and there that will never be won. The only way that we can get things going here is if we together started, you know, so more of us have to push for sitting down together to hash out a new plan, a better plan than bouncing along here, you know, in the stream of life, and, you know, perhaps, you know, getting stuck in the back eddies and whatnot, you know, that I think that we've done here for quite a while. We need to be on the path all together. Chuk. You must. That is enough.